If Rajat Gupta's life were to be translated on screen, it would not be a film. It would for sure be a Netflix or Amazon miniseries. Some would argue with as many seasons as Game of Thrones. Because the life of Rajat Gupta is not what has come to define him in the most recent public memory. It is a life whose arc has known spectacular success and epic failure. It has known highs that no Indian before him in corporate memory had known. Some would argue it was virtually impossible, before he showed it was possible, to break through the rather insular boardrooms of America, the race-conscious, color-wary boardrooms of America. Long before you knew the names Indra Nui or Satya Nadella, he was the name who made it possible. But after that, his life has been more than just McKinsey. McKinsey may be the most public part of his career, but he also went on to found two formidable institutions in India, the Indian School of Business and the Public Health Foundation of India. He had on call absolutely everybody of contemporary relevance in the modern world. If you stopped at his Rolodex at B, you would still already include a former president, Bill Clinton, and one of the richest men in the world, Bill Gates. You don't arrive at that kind of influence because you know people. You arrive at that kind of influence because you're a man to know. That's what we hope to do. That's what we hope to get to know. Rajat Gupta, may we have you on stage. Rajat, before we come to, as I said, the most recent conversation in public memory, you have been described, over the course of coverage of the case, you have been described frequently as a fallen angel. And it's very intriguing. I think even a book was written by that name that calls you fallen angel. Your lawyer said that your fall from grace was of Greek tragedy proportions. How did people come to invest this much in somebody who is fundamentally a corporate leader? Why did they invest so much in you? And why did, therefore, your fall from grace seem to be so cataclysmic even to the average citizen, certainly of this country?
Well, I think it is because it was a very unlikely and perhaps unbelievable fall in many ways. And if you read some of the books or articles that are written about me, they would keep saying, oh, there are these and these circumstantial evidence, and the prosecutors say this and all that. And they would end by saying, I still don't understand why he did it, or we can't figure out why he did it. Not stopping to ask the question, maybe he didn't do it. So there is a thought always, when you have that kind of situation, to come to judgment quickly. In my particular case, it was in some ways difficult to believe, although I must say that the prosecutors ran a great campaign in the press and otherwise, with many, many small things, like actually charging me before Rajaratnam's trial so that I could be tried in court without the ability to defend myself. I was tried in absentia. So my only question, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to tell my story, is people would keep saying, I still don't understand. You know, he had it, why did he do it? Not stopping to ask the question. Maybe he didn't.
So that actually brings me to my next question. You have said somewhere that this book is not your defense. You said, I was charged, I was convicted, I appealed, I lost on appeal. This book is not my defense. What then is this book? Why did you feel the need to tell the story of your life?
Well, as I say in the book, after an agonizing period, I in the end decided not to testify, which I believe still was a mistake. Not that the outcome would have for sure been different if I had testified. So I didn't get a chance to tell my story. I also honored, unlike the prosecution, I honored that when the matter is sub judice, You don't talk about it in the press. So I felt that I should tell my side of the story, not for the purpose of redeeming myself, not for the purpose of relitigating my case, but to tell the story, my side. But also, the book that I've written, about 1/3 is about the case that everybody asks me about and we talk about. 2/3 is nothing to do with the case. It has to do with my life. And when I thought about it, I said, this actually, even though it's a little bit immodest to say, it's an interesting story. Most everybody's life, I'm sure, in this room is also an interesting story. And what I wanted to do was to write a story that all of you could relate to. All of you could see a piece of yourself in it. And I wanted to describe what I went through all the ups and downs. And maybe in that, you would place yourself in it and learn some lessons from it. That was the objective, actually. Also, the objective was to actually, hopefully, motivate young people to a certain life philosophy that I have followed, and I think it has merit, and hopefully they will get some inspiration from that.
So I'd like to come back to a couple of strands in that conversation, but first, in your own words, because you said you did not testify, you did not take the stand, how would you tell the story of this case? The prosecution put forward a case built on circumstantial evidence, but substantial enough circumstantial evidence that a jury found you guilty, and on appeal as well. How do you account for that?
Well, let me start by just giving a very quick, what is insider trading? Insider trading is that you should have passed on market-moving inside information to someone who would then trade on that information. That's condition one. Condition two is that there should have been a quid pro quo arrangement, that you give information and you get some benefit from that information, you get paid. The third is that when you give that information, you have criminal intent. If some information passes accidentally, that's not insider trading. So after you cut out all the positioning, 16 seconds, this, that, other, lots of descriptions, in the end, they had some circumstantial evidence that said, you know, in the same time frame as Rajaratnam traded, there was a phone call by me. Well, there were many, many other phone calls by me at the same time that he, but anyway, it was circumstantial evidence. They had absolutely no proof of any benefit or any quid pro quo. In Rajaratnam's case, they were around Galleon, there were 22 or plus 25, maybe something like that, number of cases. In each and every case, there was a quid pro quo, there was actual benefit. I was the only one amongst all the cases where the government in the end admitted there was no benefit, and they resorted to saying the benefit was friendship. Well, Rajaratnam was not even a friend of mine, certainly not at that time when he had already taken money from me. In terms of criminal intent, I had inside board information for 35 years. I did some of the largest mergers in the US like Gillette and P&G. I had market-moving information every week of my career. I never used it once. I never traded in any stocks in my life. So to say that I had criminal intent is actually a complete exaggeration. So, to give them credit, they built an extraordinary narrative out of thin strands of evidence, and if you read the book, you will at least hear my side of the story. There is an alternate narrative, which I present in the book, which I believe is the true one. But, you know, they did a great job.
Was there hubris? Did you simply believe you would not be taken down or could not be taken down? Or did you believe that you could not be taken down because according to you, you had done nothing?
Well, certainly the latter. My lawyers kept saying there is no case, there is no case, and as far as I'm concerned, there was no case. I don't think there's any, issue of hubris here, because you see, I had first learned in 2009 by the Goldman lawyer saying your name has come up in some telephone recorded conversations. And for the next year and 3 months, I never heard a thing from either the Justice Department or SEC about what they were investigating. I hired a lawyer, and I would ask my lawyer, can you find out what the story is? So nothing at all. So it's not, I don't think hubris plays into it, but yes, I knew I was innocent. I thought in the end that there is no case, and my lawyers kept saying that. What I did not fully appreciate, because I'd never been in a case in my life before nor consulted with a lawyer, that unfortunately, in the context that was there at that time, you are not innocent until proven guilty. You're actually guilty till you can prove yourself innocent. And how do you prove a negative? How do you prove you didn't? You can't do that. It was the government's to prove, and they didn't necessarily prove it. I would also say that the jury system is supposed to be a jury of peers, and certainly the jury I had were not peers. They had no knowledge of the financial system, and they were generally, well,
you have said that you believe that, so when you say peers, are you suggesting that more complex, let's just say, crimes that are under investigation should be put to a more specialized jury?
I would say so, because, I observed the jury during my trial. Most of the time, they were absolutely dead bored. Firstly, that was the strategy of the prosecutors.
I believe the judge complimented them for staying awake at some point.
Yes, that is true. That is absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Raj Ratnam, who has clearly played a central role, of course in this case and clearly in your destiny, talk us through the unlikely friendship or relationship that you had with Raj Ratnam.
No, I wouldn't say it's unlikely. It was not really a friendship in the way you think about friendship. I first came to know Raj Ratnam when he gave a significant donation to the Indian School of Business. He was Anil Kumar's classmate, and Anil must have told him about the business school. He was quite a generous man. He decided to give a significant amount of money to the business school. I called him at that point to thank him. Some years later, I met him at a mutual friend's place for dinner. He was there. And that was Ravi Trehan, and Ravi, Raj and myself, came up with an idea of what was called then Voyager Fund, an investment fund that the three of us invested in. Ravi and Raj were active investment managers. I was not an investment manager. I was a passive investor in that. And then subsequent to after I retired, we started something called NSR. Originally, Raj was going to be part of it. He decided that he was not in the end, and it was something me and Parag Saxena started, and he was an investor. So, yes, I knew him. I would consider him a business associate, and we invested together, but I'd never been to his home for dinner, nor did he come to my home for dinner. We never socialized in families, etc. He was not a friend, but he was a business associate.
And if I remember correctly, your wife Anita warned you that these financial types are not like us.
Well, she did, and she was actually not only referring to him, but actually was referring to, I think, some of the other, like, for example, the Goldman senior management, and where we had a discussion. I think she was referring to the Wall Street Journal, Wall Street firms.
Preet Bharara, who is another person who has a central role to play in this. Do you believe you are the victim of an overzealous prosecutor? Do you believe his being Indian has anything to do with the fact that he wanted, it has been, it has been suggested that he wanted to portray his fairness as an American and so went after a fellow Indian. Is there merit to that?
I personally don't believe that. I mean, who knows what his motivation was and what he was thinking inside, but I actually don't believe that. But the underlying context was, and his motivation, I could speculate. Of course, I can't think what in his mind. But you have to go back to the time period in 2008. 2008 in the US, there was the largest financial crisis in a generation or more than a generation. Since the Depression in the late 20s, there was not a crisis like that. The crisis was affecting everybody, mainstream America. They were losing jobs, they were losing houses, they were losing their pensions. It was a real crisis where people on the street didn't know what was going to happen to them in the future. This crisis, as most of us know, was resulted out of starting with the housing bubble bursting and housing, over-lending, and also practices by banks and financial institutions in general, banks, housing finance companies, rating companies, etc. They created the bubble, they profited immensely from it, the executives were rewarded extraordinarily for it, and then when everything collapsed, basically the government bailed them out. The government not only bailed them out, no one up to this date, none of the leading executives in that era were ever held accountable. They were not charged with anything. The institutions they belonged to were fined heavily, which means the shareholders paid a lot of money. But it is almost an unbelievable thing to think of that the institutions did a lot of wrongdoing, they admitted to it, and nobody in the institutions was held accountable. I mean, institutions don't do wrongdoing, individuals do. So it was an extraordinary time. Prosecutors like Preet Bharara were not able to hold accountable anyone that they really should have. That should have been their first priority. Instead, they went after easy targets. Easy targets were hedge funds. There is a book recently called The Chicken Shit Club. And the Chicken Shit Club refers to prosecutors who go after cases that they can win, not cases that really should go after and bring to justice. So back to your real question of saying what was the motivation? It was not that I was Indian. It was about they had to have a diversionary tactic because they couldn't get the real culprits. Let's get the hedge funds. And that's what they did. And even there, they couldn't get the most important hedge funds like Stevie Cohen and so on.
I'd like to come to your time in prison, but before that, I think it's important to understand your journey. How did a boy from Calcutta end up as possibly the most influential corporate Indian in the world? You were chosen to lead McKinsey. I think you were just 45 or turning 46. You were not just the first foreign-born managing director, you were also possibly the youngest. To what do you attribute your extraordinary success?
Well, I would...
Let's be immodest here now for a minute.
No, not more. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with being at the right place at the right time. And I don't say it with false modesty or anything. If you read the book, you'll see in many places, it happened like that. I mean, I was turned down at McKinsey first. It was just happened to be lucky that I was sitting in a class where the professor was a good friend, a classmate of the then head of New York office, and he regarded me as a good student and thought McKinsey made a bad mistake, and he convinced the New York office manager to invite me to a full set of interviews, which I did, and I got elected. I ended up in Scandinavia, not because it was something I'd thought through with great strategic foresight, but it accidentally happened that they needed people there, and I said, yeah. And it also accidentally happened that the head of the office there fell sick, and it was not an important enough office for the firm to send a senior partner there. They said, okay, you run it. I was a junior partner. So, and I made that a great success. That was, came back to Chicago, and I was not going to be head of the Chicago office. And I put my foot down, and finally the managing director relented. And if I had not done any of those things, or if I had not been in those places, I'm not sure I would have made it. But
sure, but when you say you made a success, for example, what did you do differently? I know one of the things that has been talked about, maybe not enough, is your leadership style that you call leading from behind. Now, I know people, well, Rahul Gandhi is a prime example of one who's not making leading from behind work for him. What did you do with leading from behind?
I'm not sure, maybe it doesn't apply to political leadership, maybe not here anyway.
But less facetiously, what was that leadership style that seems to have won you not just success, but incredible loyalty from people who have worked with you?
Well, I think, you know, if one wants to draw some lessons from my professional career, let me sort of sound off one or two. One was actually always working to become a better professional. I mean, there are lots of people who manage their careers. I was never very good at it. It was like, I'm here to become a consultant. Let me learn how to be the best consultant I can be. I was very late in everything. I was elected late, I was in all that. But I concentrated on becoming a better professional. And in the end, it rewarded me well in my career. So I had a slow start, but caught up. Another lesson I learned, and I always did that, is to make other people successful. I mean, the idea that you are so brilliant that you can create all by yourself a great institution or succeed all by the dint of your own efforts and nobody else is completely false. If you can make other people successful, they in turn will make you far more successful than you ever dreamt of. And that, I believe, was the truth. Another very important lesson I learned was, you know, to get out of your comfort zone. It is easy to be stuck and doing well. I don't mean stuck in a bad sense. I mean, you're doing very well, very successful. You know, you get comfortable in your position. You're doing great. But that's the time to change. That's the time to say, no, I'm not learning enough. I'm too comfortable in my job. I can do it well. I'm not learning enough. And if I look at the arc of my professional career, it's always been that. Is just after 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, whenever you get too comfortable, just change and learn something new, deal with some more challenges, etc. I could go on and on with a few more lessons, but I think if you read the book, I'll just say that I didn't list them out. But again, I think if you read the book, you will see yourself in it, you'll see how you dealt, and hopefully by osmosis, you'll gather some of these thoughts.
So will you talk us through the man you were before the case? What drove you? What made you get out of bed in the morning? Because you have suggested somewhere that, and you said now it wasn't a planned career, there was no particular trajectory. What did you, and you also said, sorry, you said, I wanted to be a consultant. Now, since this is Gurgaon, 70% of the room does know what a consultant does. But for the other 30% of us, who wakes up wanting to be a consultant? What do consultants do?
I don't, you know, consultant is a very broad term. I'll tell you what McKinsey does. McKinsey basically advises top management on matters of strategy, organization, operations that are of concern, and hopefully to make a positive impact on our clients. So that's what we did. That's what I spent 37 years doing. But you ask a broader question, I think. What I'll say I'll say one thing. I always felt that business was a force for good. And if you can make business more effective, more successful, that is a great contribution to society. But then I also felt, and that was the other side of it, which is that business works with the permission of society. Business has an obligation to give back to society. And that is a very, very important thing. But I also discovered one little thing that was interesting to me, is that business problems are relatively straightforward and easy. If you think about the societal problems, if you think about poverty alleviation, if you think about water, health, education, these are extremely complex problems. And actually, the skills that businesses develop are instrumental in solving some of these problems. Now, it can't happen without political leadership. It can't happen without involvement of civil society. But the skills that business have is quite important. I'll give you a small example. I used to be the chairman of the Global Fund for AIDS, Malaria, and Tuberculosis. The objective of that fund was to defeat these three diseases: AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. This is the largest three infectious diseases in the world. It was also a huge fund. We used to disperse $4 billion a year towards these diseases. But what was unique about it, what was unique about the structure, was that it was a public-private partnership with business, with governments, and with civil society, working together. The board consisted of that. The money came from governments and foundations and so on, and businesses. And also represented in the board were the people who were affected by the disease, countries who had the great disease load on this. Long story short, malaria, there were 1 million deaths a year of children from malaria 10 years ago. Today it's 400,000. The simple reason is we were able to bring, the solutions were well known. Insecticide impregnated bed nets, ACTs, which is a modern medication, but the trick was to get it all the way distributed in the most remote parts of the African continent, in Asia, and et cetera, and make sure that that gets used. So that's where the logistics, that's where the distribution, the marketing, all of that came in. And since we were able to bring that public-private partnership, it was successful. So all I'm saying is that it's important that we recognize, business recognizes that it has an obligation to society. It should bring its skills to really help society solve the most difficult and intractable problems.
Okay, like I said, there's also a couple of strands there to follow, but first, your time in prison. By all accounts, and you've also said, I think in the book, that other than the death of your parents, you lost both parents before the age of 19. Other than that, you led a by and large charmed life. To go from that life, you were on planes 20 days a month. You could, as I said earlier, pick up the phone, call people, make things happen. To go from that to being for over 20 months in prison, 2 of those months in solitary confinement. Is it possible to describe what that experience was like for you?
Well, I went to my prison term, which was 19 months. I was a 2-year sentence, but basically I went there for 19 months. Essentially, 2 months was in solitary confinement. The 8 months before that, or 8.5 months or so, was in a low security prison, and about 8.5 months in a high security prison. If you read the book and some of the interviews I've given, it may seem like that prison was easy. It wasn't. I mean, that was a little bit of an exaggeration. When I was preparing for prison, what it reminded me of, my father was a freedom fighter, and he was in jails for almost 10 years, in and out of jails. And as a result of it, his health was very poor. And he was a journalist, he was an editor of a newspaper. I didn't see him very often during the evenings. But in his last 2 years of his life, he was quite sick and would be in the hospital, and I would go and, take him for a walk and spend some time with him right after I finished school. And that was the first time I learned a lot about his life during those times, and it made a very big impression on me. He used to say that, you can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you deal with it. He never spoke a bad word about the British or his captors. He had no anger in him. He didn't kind of say, why me? He didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a political prisoner, and he felt like he was going to hold his head high and make sure whatever came his way, he'll deal with it. When I was preparing, thank you. When I was preparing for prison, I remembered those words, and I was feeling like that. I said, I'm going to treat it as if I'm going to a monastery, and I'm going to come out of it physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually stronger than I went in. And I prepared for that.
How did you prepare? What did you?
Well,
what was the mental training involved?
More. I said, let me make sure. I felt like I was a political prisoner. I would, of course, go by the rules, but I would not walk around with my head bowed down, or I wouldn't necessarily. I would have the spirit in me that you should have. But I have to tell you that, and it went well. In the beginning, it was good. I walked a lot. I made new friends, people I would have never met in the course of my life, some of whom I still keep in touch with as I've got out of prison. But what I was not really prepared for was solitary confinement, which was really quite an extraordinary experience. And
why were you in solitary?
Well, as most of you know, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the guards, the prison guards, they have absolute power over you. And they sent me to solitary confinement on the flimsiest of excuses. The first one I was tying my shoelaces at the time of count. He could easily count me, that was not the issue. But he sent me for a week to solitary confinement.
So the count is when everybody's lined up.
Everybody goes around and
you dared to bend down to tie your shoelace, and that got you into solitary.
Yes. And the second time it was even worse. I had some back problems, so I had rolled up a rolled up a towel that you could buy in the commissary in the prison, and stitched it up and used it as a back support. And he came to search my premises. He didn't like me because I was quite happy and didn't go around with my head bowed down. And he couldn't find anything. He was looking for something that was going to be illegal or contraband, as they call it. And then he looked at my bed and he saw this rolled up towel. And he said, "What's that?" I said, "That's a towel that I've rolled it up." And he said, "Well, you have altered government property, and you're not supposed to do that, so I'm going to send you to..."
Are you sure he's not a bureaucrat?
Well, he's worse than that. So I have to give you, I should tell you, if you allow me, for
Absolutely.
a minute to tell you about what this solitary confinement thing is like. The solitary confinement, your cell is maybe 2/3 of this stage. And you have a steel bunk bed with a mattress that has been probably there for 15 years, which means that it's kind of shrunk down to 2 plastic sheets, and you're basically sleeping on a steel bed. You have a steel toilet, a steel wash basin that has no seat cover or anything. You have a steel door that is a big, thick 4-inch steel door. In that steel door is a little slot, And that slot it's locked, they open it up and they shove food through it. And if you're lucky enough to catch it, you will eat it from the plate, otherwise you pick it up from the floor. You know, they humiliate you any way they can. You get this, all of you have seen, maybe some of you have seen Orange is the New Black. They give you that orange uniform that's there, but they give you one set, and you have to strip in front of them in order to get the new set of clothes. They strip search you at will, they handcuff you whenever they please, or in the sense of whenever you have to do anything outside the cell. They are required by law to send you for a fresh air for 1 hour a day. And what they did is they would take you, handcuff you, and walk you about 20 yards, and they would put you in a cage that is maybe twice the size of the stage. And there are barbed wire fences all around, all sides and on the top. And you can walk back and forth in that cage to get some fresh air and exercise. So I played a little trick on the guard. And that was that my appeal was still going on, and I had the ability to schedule legal conference calls. By law, they have to allow me to have a conference call. So I did, and every 2 or 3 days, my lawyers would schedule a 1 to 2 hour conference call. So this guard had to take me handcuffed to a conference room. He wouldn't even take off my handcuffs. I'd do the call like, you know, holding the phone and with my handcuffed hands, but that he had to stand outside for as long as the call lasted. So the guy had to stand outside guarding me. I did it every 2 or 3 days. This went on for weeks. And then, you know, one day he says, I don't understand you. You know, you've never asked me when I'm going to get out of solitary confinement. You'd never asked me about what the process. I said, why should I? You know, solitary confinement is like prison with room service. So why bother? So he said, oh, this guy's enjoying, this guy, I'm not going to break this guy in the solitary confinement. But truth be told, it was a very, very hard time. You know, it is like Vipassana, but you have absolutely no one to talk to for weeks on end. And I had with me 2 books which I had to fight hard to take. One was the Bhagavad-Gita, and another was Light on Pranayam by Iyengar. Light on Pranayam by Iyengar. And I have to say, the Bhagavad-Gita in the end was a great inspiration. I never read it cover to cover. I knew parts of it. I never read it, but it was a great inspiration to go through solitary confinement.
Are you religious or spiritual by temperament, or was this more a coping mechanism? No,
I believe I'm spiritual by temperament. I always have been, and I've been a good fan of it. I used to speak at many convocations, certainly, you know, Indian School of Business, I must have gone 10 convocations in a row, and I always used to end with one Gita shlok which I loved, which is Karmanye adhikarastu ma phaleshu kadachan ma karma phala hetur bhur ma sangosta karmani. You have a right to work, never to the fruits thereof. You should work with the right intentions, and if you do your very best, then the results don't matter.
So it's one of the many interesting parts of your journey to prison is that the same judge who was actually very hostile to you early in the proceedings, at the time of sentencing, and there is a curious aspect of American judicial law, which is that while you were denied, your lawyers were denied the right to present your many humanitarian works in your defense, at the time of sentencing, you were encouraged to judge the person in the wholeness of their character. And I think Judge Rakoff said that he received over 400 letters from everybody ranging from Kofi Annan to Bill Gates to the Chowkidar, I think, somewhere who had worked with you. He said, I have never seen such an outpouring of testimonies for one person. To what do you attribute that kind of love for, at that point, a convicted criminal?
Well, I think that you have to ask the people who wrote the letters. I would, if I were to speculate, it would have to be because they found most of the people who wrote the letters knew me as a character, knew my integrity, knew my, way of working and my life philosophy, and they really did not believe that I could have done what they were said I did. Second thing is that when you mentor lots of people, when you work with a lot of people, when you work in teams, and when you work towards making them successful, they stand up in your defense, and that's what they were doing.
Okay, one final question in this series, which was your work both in setting up ISB as well as the Public Health Foundation. Two things. Why did you enter the space of institution building? What drove you? And why those two domains? Why education? Why health?
Well, as I said to you before, I always felt that business has an obligation to give back to society. When I became head of McKinsey, it's a very intense job, it's a high contact job, I was very busy in it, but at the same time I was thinking, how can I really give back? I used to give back in small ways all the time. I looked inside myself and what do I really know? And McKinsey is probably the leading employer in every leading business school in the world, actually. And I used to sit on, I was chairman of the Harvard Business School board, and I used to sit on the board of Kellogg and MIT and so on. So I knew a lot about business schools. And I felt that India, even though the IIMs were very successful, and they were like IITs where I went to, the selection process is draconian, and you get extraordinarily good students, but I didn't think it was a research institution or it was not necessarily a world-class institution. And the aspiration was to create a world-class institution. So that's why ISB was created. I was extraordinarily fortunate, again, at the same time, you're there at the right time, right place at the right time, and I was able to harness a lot of industrial leaders in this country. They never collaborated on anything else before in their life, I can tell you this. But
Actually, that was one of my questions. How did you get a lot of very rich people to agree to give away money? Because the one thing that makes rich people rich is they hold on to their money.
Well, I don't know. I think I probably have raised more money in India than at least, and this is, I'm not trying to show off, than almost anybody I know of in many causes that I have raised money for. And if you really ask me what was the reason was, first, that they felt that I had a vision and they believed in that vision. Secondly, I absolutely didn't want it to have anything to do with me. The first condition was really this was a school that was going to be co-founded by lots of people. I didn't want my name in it anywhere for anything, ever. This was not important to me. The important thing was to create a great institution. So, so we got the 12 of the richest and the most influential industrial leaders to get together, give a lot of money to start the school. But I cannot resist telling you the story of the Public Health Foundation, which you mentioned. It was quite a different story. After 2 or 3 years, I used to come back for graduations every year. By the way, problem is that if you start talking about ISB, I can keep on going. We just crossed 10,000 alumni within this 15 years of ISB, which is quite an extraordinary feat. And we graduate more than 1,000 MBAs a year now. But, and it is in the top 25 in the world. So, no, I'm just going on. But the story I wanted to tell you is that I went back from a ISB graduation, and I used to be on the board of Harvard School of Public Health. And I go and have breakfast with the dean of Harvard School of Public Health. And I'm all kind of pumped up, and I say, you know, I just came back from the graduation. It was a terrific graduation. All these students is a world-class school, et cetera, et cetera. He was kind of kept listening to me, and he says, starting a business school, that's easy. If you really want to make a difference to the country, start some schools of public health. And I was, you know, a little bit, he poo-pooed all this effort I'd put in. But he was right. I mean, to think about it, and he had done his research in India. He was very familiar with India. And he told me that the state of the health of the country is extremely poor. While you may have the best doctors and perhaps the state-of-the-art hospitals, but that kind of clinical care does not improve the state of the health of the country. The health of the country is all about preventive and promotive health. And India is a very poor. And in fact, you know, our statistics are worse than Bangladesh or worse than many, many poorer countries you would think. And this is an area, unless we can really improve the health of our country. I mean, there are two simple things, you know, education and health are the greatest equalizers. If you don't have those two, if you don't have universal access to them, and if you don't have effective education system and effective healthcare system, you'll never become a truly developed country.
So one of the things, to shift tangents a bit, but because we have the good fortune of being able to bring Shekhar back on stage, this time to join Rajat, when we were reading up about them, we discovered they went to school, well, together and at the same time, 2 or 3 years apart, both to the same school, and that they've been friends. So I think it's time to have...
But before you do that, yeah. I have to really complain to the organizers. I was first told that Shekhar was going to be here. I was absolutely delighted. He's been a great friend, and not only a great friend, just a wonderful supporter. I mean, I don't read very much on all the media and stuff like that, but Shekhar wrote a blog in my support, which... It
was called In Defense of Rajat Gupta in 2012.
Yeah, and Anita found it for me, and I read it. It moved me to tears. I mean, this was such a friend, and I have to say that.
Sorry, and that's your complaint against us? And that's your complaint against us?
No, the complaint is they put Shekhar before me. How can you act like Shekhar? It's impossible. So, you know,
that's why we're going to give you the opportunity to talk to each other.
Right, okay.
Shekhar, may we have you back on stage, please? To start on a lighter note, first of all, do you remember each other from back in school at all? What school was this? And, well, it was Modern School Barakamba, but what years, and did you know each other back in school?
Yeah, but like, I've forgotten the years.
I haven't, but I'm courteous enough not to remind you.
We're talking about now, right?
So, do you remember each other from school?
In all honesty, I have vague memories, but the memory I have first of Shekhar is many years later in London. And I was visiting, and somehow I happened to connect up with him, and we were going to meet. But then Shekhar said, no, we can't meet at some restaurant or something like that. You come to my studio, I'll take you to my cutting floor. So I don't know whether you remember or not, we climbed this, you know, very sort of disorganized, disabled place, which was his creative place, and there was all kinds of celluloid all over the place, and some machines that he viewed the movies and was cutting and editing around there. So that's where you did all your stuff that then you regret it later on saying, I should have cut that scene out. But I've seen him in action, going through movies, cutting and editing. So I don't know whether you remember that time.
Yeah, no, I remember that well, yeah. I was telling a world-famous management consultant, showing me in an editing studio, as I said.
But do you have memories from school, or do yours start later as well?
I have a vague memory of in school.
What's
We were all in shorts.
We were all in shorts.
I didn't ask for scarring memories. Okay, as adults, you have said you have been good friends and supporters. What's at the heart of this friendship? Because ostensibly you have dramatically different lives and personalities. What, for both of you, is at the heart of a friendship?
I can tell you, it's like, I wrote that, actually I was one of the persons who wrote that letter, a letter to the judge, and one of the things I said we have many icons in India, movie stars, we have cricketers, we have one icon that everybody loves in business, not because he's a businessman, but the number of young people that I met that were studying business or in school say, what do you want to do? We want to be like Rajat Gupta. And that's what that's true. That's exactly what was going on. And part of what I wrote to the judge was that you're destroying the dreams of, so many young people in India by doing this. Because
you also made a very necessary point about nuance, because you said a world that does not distinguish between Rajratnam and Rajat Gupta has a problem.
Yeah, I said that.
And what did you mean by that?
May I?
Please.
Well, there was a deliberate act by one, and a man that actually just caught in a flow of circumstance that are not of his doing. I mean, that's the difference. One was a deliberate act, and the other was a man who, I can say it because he cannot, I'll say it. He was brown. He was somebody's, he was, at a time when a nation is collapsing, you pick the most vulnerable and blame them. And the nation was collapsing, and they found a brown man. I said, see, they're like that. I know Rajat will never say that. And he will deny it and deny it and deny it, and the whole world knows it's true. Right? Yeah.
Rajat, what for you is at the heart of your relationship with Shekhar, and what do you value in him as a friend and as an artist?
First, I'm a Punjabi too, only half, so. No, actually, Shekhar, I have to say, from the day I got to seriously know him as an adult, he was such a Renaissance man. I mean, he was like, he's a chartered accountant by profession. You can't guess him. He knows the numbers. He is an analytical, sharp shooter. Yet, he is one of the most creative people I've met. And, you always judge a person by whether you spend an evening with the person, whether you come out of it learning something with new ideas. Not that every meeting should be like that, but with Shekhar, every meeting was like that. Whether you're downing fairly large number of single malts, or whether we were taking a stroll around a street in London or wherever it was, or his studio, I came away feeling that I learned something. He is truly a Renaissance man.
I think what he's forgotten, or he's not saying, is that you persuaded me. We did a West End and a Broadway show that I produced with Andrew Lloyd Webber, which actually took A.R. Rahman to the West, right. Bombay Dreams, and he came and he persuaded me to give the premiere to the American Indian Foundation, which you were running at that time.
Yes.
So we did a premiere on Broadway together. Then he will not admit this. One day I just woke up in the morning, I said, I think the next thing I'm going to do is raise $1 billion and start a private equity fund to create intellectual property in India. Suddenly a dream, and because I realized that that's what's not going on. So I asked around, and I then went to Deepak Chopra, who's a common friend. And Deepak, come on, join me, let's do something. And he got fired by it. So I asked around, I said, so who should we take on our advisory board? He said, you take Rajat Gupta, everybody will give you money. So we came to Rajat. He never said no, and he never said yes. And that's the fundamental quality of being a management consultant.
I think you...
Yeah? Right.
I was about to say, I think you've answered the question, who is a consultant?
Was that?
I said, you've answered the question, who is a consultant? But again, I think you were both born around independence. Shekhar, you just before it, and Rajat the year after. What gave you to
When was independence?
I didn't reveal when you went to school. You were both born, like I said, give or take 2 or 3 years apart from each other. And there was no historical kind of figure to follow who had made the transition from being a successful Indian to being a successful global Indian. What made you both think it was possible? What made you imagine that there was something for you, not just limited to, and I don't say limited in any derogatory way, but I mean to say, to expand the scope of your influence and to expand the scope of the domains you engage with outside of India. What made you both think it was possible?
I can tell you about myself. It was easy. I just made Bandit Queen, and everybody in India was, all the big stars said, we want to work with you, make all the distributors. I could see I could make a lot of money. So one day I sat down and I said, okay, Shekhar, look at all the very successful directors in India and see what they're doing. And I saw all their films and I said, is that what you want to be stuck with all the rest of your life? And the clear answer was no. And I said, I have to go somewhere where you can get 10 stories. It wasn't like I wanted to be an international director. I just wanted to tell more stories than a film in which a hero is no hero without a mother. You know, that used to be it, right? So there was like limitations. You can still see it. It's getting better, but you can still see the limits within which Indian cinema exists. And for me, it was just a desire to work out, you know, to break out of those limits. And so I had no choice to do it.
You know, in my case, of course, I left India right after college and had exposure in the US, and then I happened to go to Europe and had a lot of exposure there, and then we started, I used to always do a fair amount of work in India and started working here. The first impetus came when I became head of McKinsey. I realized that McKinsey was actually not as global as we thought it was. It was primarily a US and European firm. And one of the things I decided to do was to make McKinsey truly global, because the clients' globalization was in full swing. Our clients were turning global. We had to be at least as global as our clients. So that was a major strategy in the firm. And then I have to say, my work outside consulting, in the traditional way, all in the philanthropies and health and education and other things, took me very much global. And I felt like, yes, I became a global citizen the way I lived and the issues I worked on, yet my heart was into my country of my birth and the country I adopted were clearly places I've related to very much. But basically, I felt I was a global citizen.
And a final question. Rajat, you say, interestingly in the book, that, you know, for example, I think you must be the only senior corporate leader in the world to not play golf. And you said that was deliberate. It was deliberate because you wanted to save the time that you were not spending at work to spend with your family. But in that context, you also said you didn't socialize with clients a lot after work. The interesting point you made is, if you have a point of difference like that, exploit your difference, right? In what ways did you both exploit your difference? What was that difference, and how did you exploit it to deliver an outcome that others didn't?
Well, I'd say, you know, one of them you pointed out, I actually decided that the best thing to do is not necessarily to always out-story tell my American counterparts who could talk about basketball and football with our clients much better than I could ever do. So I would talk about Indian weddings and Holi and something else, you know. that they had no idea what, but you could weave a wonderful story around it. So they were very intrigued, and on top of that, I would invite them home and give a wonderful home-cooked meal. That Anita is a very good Kashmiri cook, so there we had it. So that was a good change.
Yes, sir, it's all storytelling. Management consultancy is all about storytelling.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And actually, I did say last question, but what the hell, one more. What is your relationship with money, both of you? Because is it possible for money to see the true value of creative endeavor? Or is that, and I ask you, Rajat, as somebody who represents or who has dealt extensively with the world of money, and I ask you, Shekhar, as somebody who has often sought it to do the creative work you need to. What is that tenuous relationship?
I'm scared of money. I fear it. I really, really fear it, because every time you make money, you say, "Bahut paisa bana liya, ab kya kare?" You know, it's just like, but there is, see, I come from a very middle-class family, and my parents were refugees from Pakistan, and the one thing my father kept saying, "Bete, kabhi udhar nahi lena. Kabhi udhar nahi lena. Do not take a bank loan, don't take loans, don't take anything." Now, if I want to produce a film, main kya karunga? You know, where will the money come from? I can't take a loan, I can't take an udhar. So I have this kind of strange relationship that if I have to create a film, I have to take money from somebody. That's why I've always been, I'll tell you a little story about my dad, right? My dad was never happy about me going into accounting. He was a doctor, and I was trained as a chartered accountant. And I was a management consultant for 6 months. And I loved it, though. It was great. I kept telling him, Dad, films. And he was Nehru generation. So what are you doing for the nation, he would ask. I'm a doctor, I save lives. I said, Dad, I make movies. Eh? What does that do for the country? So I had a big problem. So one day, I made Elizabeth. We were nominated for, 8 or 9 Oscars. And I called my dad. So I said, Dad. In those days, only 5 films were nominated. Now it was 10. We got the best film Oscar, best this, best that, best all these nomination Oscars. My dad, well done, son. Congratulations. Does that mean you'll get another job? See, that's the family I came from. Beta dhyari milegi na. So like, how can I have a relationship with money?
Rajat, on the other end of that spectrum.
Yeah,
what does it take? I think my question really is, what does it take to get money to put its might behind something truly worthwhile?
Well, first I have to say that, my childhood experiences are similar to what you say. I came from a middle-class family and from a generation that fought for the freedom of the country. My memory of my father is he wore a dhoti, he had 3 sets. He used to wash a set, dhoti and kurta, every day when he had his shower, and wore the other one, and the third one was for some emergency if something happened. Or, that was his life. He gave away money to anybody who asked for it. My mother was a little more smart, and if we would have been in trouble when we lost our parents if it hadn't been for my mother saving some money that carried us through. But back to your question, I always believed that we should live well below our means. I mean, when Anita and I were expecting our first child, we decided to buy a house. She was working at Bell Labs and I was working at McKinsey, both very well-paying organizations, and we made a lot of money. And we bought a house. When I told my colleagues that we had bought a house for $60,000, they were shocked. They said, you bought a for $60,000. We didn't need anything more than that because we could buy our house 5 times its size. So my relationship to money has to do with, you should live well below what you can afford. And once you do that, then you don't have to worry about money. In fact, part of the reasons I got into trouble, I never worried about it, and I got often taken for a ride. But I earned a lot of money, so that's how it works.
On that note, we'll continue the
Can I
conversation.
say something about to Rajat?
Absolutely.
Actually, the judge did India a great favor. He's back here. No, that's true. He's back here at a time when India needs people like him, not only because of some of the trouble we are in, but also because the opportunities here are enormous, much more here than they would ever be in the United States right now. So welcome back.
On that note of friendship, the bar is open. Rajat will be signing books, I hope, for a brief while. And Rajat and Shekhar are both available for continuing the conversations informally. Thank you, both of you, gentlemen. And thank you, as always,